Welcome to Redesigning the Undergraduate Experience Core and General Education program. In this micro lesson, we will examine how to build a curriculum that promotes higher levels of learning and development by applying the principles of sequence and progression. In the previous session, I shared how curriculum developers and instructional designers often begin the design process by asking and answering the question, what should the learner know, feel, value, or believe, and be able to do at the completion of this program, course, unit, module, or learning experience? Answering this question helps the designer identify and define the desired student outcomes of the program or experience. Designers recognize that to promote significant learning or learning that it sticks, it is important to recognize the synergy that exists when focusing on developing knowledge, attitudes, and skills. For examples, learners who are motivated and excited to learn are more likely to put the time and effort that is required to learn complex concepts or difficult skills. For these reasons, designers often craft student outcomes and learning objectives in the affective, cognitive, and psychomotor domains. Once designers identify and define student outcomes in the three learning domains, they then use their subject matter expertise to determine the range of concepts, principles, topics, skills, values, behaviors students need to learn and or develop to achieve the desired student outcomes. This is the scope of the curriculum, which is often organized into content areas. Learning objectives are developed for each content area. These learning objectives are often referred to as content standards. After designers organize the topics into content areas, they can then focus on developing the sequence of the curriculum. Sequence consists of organizing fundamental concepts within a content area into a logical sequence of topics and skills that builds upon students' prior learning and serves as building blocks for learning increasingly complex material. For example, if a learner is expected to create a budget, they must first learn fundamental concepts associated with identifying, categorizing, and estimating different types of expenses and income. After designers organize content areas into a logical sequence of topics and skills, they can start to apply the principle of progression by ordering the topics and skills by levels of difficulty or complexity. For example, learning how to organize expenses by categories is much easier than constructing an annual budget. Curriculum developers and instructional designers often use Bloom's taxonomy as a guide to apply the principles of sequence and progression within a course or curriculum. Bloom's taxonomy organizes each learning domain into a hierarchical model which classifies learning into levels of complexity and specificity. Each level builds upon the previous level. For example, the levels of learning of the cognitive domain include remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Learners develop higher order thinking skills as they progress through the levels of cognitive development. The affective domain involves emotional and attitudinal development. Levels of development in the affective domain begins with the student receiving, which involves listening and being attentive, and moves up to responding, where the student actively responds and participates, to valuing, where the student determines personal values and beliefs, to organizing, where the student builds consistent value systems, to characterization, where the student establishes a personal standards of behavior. The psychomotor domain involves the development of students' intellectual, manual, physical, and technical skills. Levels of development in the psychomotor domain include imitation, where the individual can imitate a model or follow step-by-step directions. Manipulation occurs when the individual can roughly replicate performance without following a model. Precision is where the individual can perform the skill without error. Articulation is where the individual can adapt their performance to changing conditions or situations, And the highest level of development is naturalization, which occurs when the individual has mastered the skill and can perform it at an unconscious level. There are plenty of resources that are available to help designers craft learning objectives. This resource is one example of a guide that can be used by designers to build a curriculum that incorporates sequence and progression. It shows each level of development for the cognitive domain with a brief description. It also identifies and describes performance tasks or ways students can demonstrate their achievement of each level of development. And finally, appropriate verbs that can be used to craft learning objectives for each level of development are included. Designers can refer to this guide to ensure that they are writing and organizing learning objectives using appropriate verbs. They can also use the guide to sequence the order and progression of the learning objectives to ensure students develop the prerequisite knowledge and skills before being asked to complete more complex tasks. Resources are also available to help designers craft learning objectives for the affective domain and the psychomotor domain. Thus, to build a curriculum that promotes higher levels of affective, cognitive, and psychomotor development, designers must incorporate sequence and progression within the design of the curriculum. Connecting content and promoting higher levels of learning and development is easier to accomplish within an academic major or program where courses often include prerequisites and the progression and sequence of courses are mapped out by academic year. In addition, faculty within an academic department or program often work together to ensure core competencies for the academic discipline are mapped and integrated into major and minor courses. However, creating a curriculum that incorporates appropriate sequence and progression in the core and general education program is often more difficult to achieve. For many students, the core and general education program is often comprised of a series of fragmented courses and experiences that lack coherence. Connections between courses are seldom made or expected, and higher ordered thinking skills are difficult to develop and achieve. In addition, when general education courses are taught in large lecture halls with tens of students, it is difficult to design learning experiences that promote higher levels of cognitive, affective, or psychomotor development. To address some of these issues, many institutions are now creating and implementing a core and general education program that allows students to focus on issues and themes that cut across disciplines, connecting content in different areas. Theme-based models organize desired student outcomes and learning objectives around a common theme or purpose. This interdisciplinary approach helps students see connections between different courses and areas of study and provides students more opportunities to deepen their level of learning. Thus, a theme-based curriculum provides a cohesive framework that can be used to establish a common purpose and goals for the general education program. Subject matter experts can work together to identify student outcomes that help students achieve these goals and designs a curriculum that applies the principles of sequence and progression to promote higher levels of cognitive, affective, and psychomotor development. Example, a theme-based core curriculum can be designed around the theme of health and sustainability. To incorporate sequence and progression into the design of this curriculum, initial courses or experiences may focus on helping students understand and assess the factors that impact their personal health and well-being, and design experiences that help students develop the knowledge, attitudes, skills, and habits to maintain their personal and their family's health and well-being. Subsequent experiences may focus on its increasingly more complex issues such as promoting health, well-being, and sustainability within businesses and communities, society, and the planet. Subject matter experts from a variety of disciplines can play a role in contributing to the identification of content standards and learning objectives that will help students develop the knowledge, attitude, and skills to achieve the desired student outcomes of a health and sustainability-based curriculum. For example, health, physical education, and biology departments can help students understand the factors that influence personal health and wellness. Social sciences can help students understand and recognize society's impact on individual and group health, well-being, and behavior. STEM disciplines can teach students about the impact of human activities and behaviors on people, animals, the environment, and the planet. The humanities can provide students opportunities to examine their personal and ethical responsibilities for supporting the health and well-being of their communities and society. The fine arts can use their power of music, art, literature, and media to help students make emotional connections that can inspire care, empathy, action that support healthier ways of living, working, and supporting their community and the planet. And finally, business and entrepreneurship programs can show students how businesses and organizations can provide value to individuals and society by focusing on sustainability, people, profit, and the planet. Creating a theme-based curriculum requires faculty to shift their perspective. Instead of asking what students should learn about their discipline, they must ask how their discipline can contribute to students achieving the desired outcomes of the program. And in this case, the desired outcomes was promoting the health and well-being of individuals, families, businesses, organizations, communities, society, and the planet. Thus, to create a curriculum that helps students build upon their prior learning and develops higher levels of a cognitive, affective, and psychomotor development, designers must first start with why and agree upon the purpose and rationale of the core and general education program. 2. Designers must identify the student outcomes for the program or the knowledge, skills, values, behaviors, and habits students will possess and demonstrate after completing the program. 3. Designers must develop the scope of the curriculum by identifying and organizing content areas and topics into content standards which identify and describe the learning objectives for each content area. 4. Designers must map these content areas and learning objectives to specific disciplines, courses, or programs. 5. Designers ensure courses, programs, or experiences are organized into a sequence that builds upon students' prior learning and provides students opportunities to deepen their understanding or refine their skills. Finally, designers use progression to encourage students to develop and demonstrate higher levels of cognitive, affective, and psychomotor development. Generally, these experiences involve some element of experiential, capstone, or cumulative learning, where students are expected to apply what they have learned to real-world situations, problems, or settings. In the next micro session, we will review the importance of matching instructional strategies to curricular goals and student outcomes.